The afternoon heat lay heavy on Fort Holloway, the kind of heat that pressed into the lungs and made even the simplest breath feel labored. The sun reflected harshly off the airfield's concrete, turning the tarmac into a shimmering mirror of discomfort. At the center of it all sat the UH-1 Huey, an olive-drab relic of another war, its once proud frame slouched in silence. The helicopter's rotor blades sagged like tired shoulders, their edges dulled by time and neglect. To anyone passing by, it looked like an artifact wheeled out of a museum, a machine that had already earned its retirement. Yet here it was, placed at the heart of a modern military demonstration meant to inspire confidence. Instead, it mocked its handlers with defiance. Around the helicopter, a swarm of young technicians buzzed like frustrated bees. Their coveralls were spotless, their laptops glowing with the green lines of diagnostic software. Everything the screen said was perfect: fuel flow steady, ignition responsive, hydraulics balanced. By the numbers, the Huey was alive, but the stubborn silence of its engine told a different story. Kyle Kramer, the lead technician and pride of the unit, made his irritation known. At 26, he carried himself like someone who had never been proven wrong, his confidence sharpened by years of classroom accolades. He lashed out with his boot, striking the helicopter's landing skid. The metallic thud was dull, as if the machine itself was mocking his arrogance. "Is this some kind of joke?" he barked, his voice cutting across the humid air. A few of his colleagues shifted uneasily but said nothing. To question him was to admit their own uncertainty, and none of them dared. Laptops sat propped on portable tables, fans whirring as the machines churned through endless cycles of self-checks. But the outcome never changed. Green lights glowed like smug lies. Everything's fine. Still, the helicopter remained lifeless. At the edge of the gathering, Lieutenant Wells stood rigid, his officer's cap shielding his eyes from the sun. Fresh from officer school, his posture was stiff with the weight of authority, but his eyes betrayed the nervous flicker of someone struggling to maintain control. He was young enough to still believe that command could be measured in how firmly one's jaw was set. As technicians muttered and adjusted cables, Wells forced composure, his gaze fixed on the rows of dignitaries waiting in the shaded grandstand. Across the field, they had come for a demonstration flight. Instead, they had been given an embarrassing spectacle. Every passing minute was another nail hammered into his career. The mood was sour, but beneath the frustration lingered something deeper: unease. This wasn't supposed to happen. Machines obeyed when the data was perfect. When the software said, "Go," the hardware should comply. Yet here was this stubborn relic, refusing to play its part, daring the new generation to understand it. From a distance, the helicopter's silence carried an almost spiritual weight. Its frame, streaked with age, seemed less like a machine and more like a monument, standing tall in protest against the arrogance of youth and technology. It was more than broken, it was waiting. But for what? None of them yet knew. The air seemed to thrum with tension as a solitary figure approached the helicopter. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if the heat and chaos around him barely existed. His jeans were faded, his olive jacket worn thin at the elbows. White hair crowned his head like a halo of experience, and his pale blue eyes carried the calm of someone who had witnessed storms far worse than a temperamental machine. Eli Vance's presence was immediately noticeable, not for noise or grandeur, but for the quiet authority that demanded attention without demanding it. The technicians barely looked up, dismissing him as nothing more than a retired relic. Kramer's smirk widened as he watched the old man approach, rag in hand from a brief pause in his futile efforts. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath. The general's toy show. Lieutenant Wells, still struggling to maintain control, stepped forward. "Can I help you, sir?" His tone was formal, tight, stripped of any real respect. "This is a restricted area." He assumed authority would be enough to deter the old man, as if rank alone could counter decades of experience. Vance's eyes didn't waver. They swept from the lieutenant to the Huey, as though reading the machine like a familiar old book. "General Michelelson sent for me," he said, his voice low and rough, rasping like gravel, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The name's Eli Vance. Kramer laughed outright, not even trying to hide the derision. Vance, huh? The general dragged you out of retirement for this? He gestured at the swarm of high-tech equipment around them. We've got a dozen. Certified avionics specialists, 3 master mechanics, and direct support from the manufacturer. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Vance said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't scold. He simply walked slowly around the Huey, inspecting every line and curve of the helicopter's frame. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if he were reconnecting with an old friend. The rotor mast, the tail boom, the engine. Cowling, he observed each detail with a patience that made the young technician squirm in discomfort. Kramer's contempt barely hid itself. Look, we've been at this for 6 hours. All systems report green. Sensors are online. Ignition has power. Fuel lines are clear. The computer says this bird should fly. Maybe she just decided to die. Some of the younger crew snickered, sharing in the amusement of an old man being brought in to consult on an obsolete bucket of bolts. Lieutenant Wells mirrored Kramer's impatience. Mr. Vance, we appreciate your willingness to help, but the situation is under control. My team is trained on fly-by-wire systems, glass cockpits, modern aircraft. Even this Huey. Vance cut him off softly, almost a whisper. Even this bird is different. She has a soul. And right now, her soul is quiet. Kramer barked a laugh that echoed across the tarmac. A soul? Okay, Pop. Everyone, grab the exorcist. Apparently we need one. The old man ignored the mockery. He continued his careful survey of the helicopter, crouching, squinting, his hands tucked in his pockets. Each movement was patient, purposeful, a study in observation rather than intervention. The technicians watched with a mixture of fascination and disdain. They saw a primitive ritual. He saw the nuances of a machine that had saved lives in ways no computer could measure. For a moment, the busy airfield, the heat, the laptop screens and digital multimeters, all of it faded into the background. Eli Vance was alone with the Huey, the past and present colliding in a silent, tense communion between man and machine. The lesson was clear to anyone paying attention. This was not a man to be underestimated, and this was not a helicopter to be dismissed. Kramer couldn't help himself. He stepped closer, hands on his hips, his voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. Look, Vance, you've had your walk around. We've got the techs, the manuals, the diagnostics, everything that actually works. What exactly do you plan to do here besides look at her and mumble about a soul? The young technicians snickered nervously, glancing at each other for confirmation that they were all on the same side. The air was thick with contempt, a mixture of arrogance and the comfort of modern tools. To them, experience was outdated. Data was king. The notion that a veteran with decades of battlefield improvisation could hold the answer was laughable. Eli didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes on the helicopter, tracing invisible lines along the fuselage, feeling angles and curves that spoke volumes to him alone. Each whine of the cooling fans, each droop of the rotor blades, told a story that no screen could replicate. He remembered the roar of the same Huey during firefights, the staccato of gunfire overhead, the smell of hot metal and cordite mingling with sweat and fear. Bird's got a soul, he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. And right, now she's silent. Kramer let out a short, incredulous laugh, loud enough for the others to hear. A soul, huh? Okay, Pop, everyone make way for the exorcist. His words, meant as a joke, carried a sharper sting than intended, a public declaration that the old man and his methods were beneath them. Lieutenant Wells, itching to assert his authority, tried to salvage professionalism. Mr. Vance, I understand you have experience, but our team is trained on the latest systems. We don't need— You don't know this bird, Eli interrupted gently but firmly, his voice carrying a calm certainty that made Wells pause mid-sentence. It wasn't arrogance, it was quiet authority, earned through fire and loss. Your systems, your computers, they are tools. This helicopter? She has secrets no manual can tell you. Kramer scoffed, rolling his eyes as he gestured at the array of diagnostic equipment. Secrets? She's a Huey, Pops, it's a machine. You're looking at wires and rotors, that's it. Eli's gaze didn't waver. He crouched by the tail boom, running a careful eye over the access panels, the bolts, the seams. Each motion was deliberate, precise, an almost ritualistic dance, born from a lifetime of hands-on knowledge. The technicians hovered, some in disbelief, others in quiet curiosity, unable to reconcile their modern tools with the patience and confidence of this old man. Vietnam, Wells muttered under his breath, flipping through Eli's file on his tablet. Crew chief. Years of combat. Flight hours. A man who had patched up Hueys in mud-soaked jungles, under fire, with whatever scraps he could find. He's just a jungle mechanic, Kramer scoffed again. This is a modern base with modern tools. He doesn't belong here. But the helicopter seemed to respond to Eli's attention. The drooping rotor blades shifted imperceptibly, the metal gleaming differently in the harsh sun. Time itself felt stretched, as though the Huey recognized its old caretaker. Kramer and Wells could see none of it. To them, Eli's methods were quaint, an amusing distraction in a world governed by data and precision. But to the others who dared to watch, there was a quiet tension building, an understanding that the real story wasn't on the computer screens. It was here, in the patient, measured hands of a man who had flown and fought beside this very machine, and who had somehow kept it alive when everything else failed. In that moment, the chasm between generations stretched wide across the tarmac. Arrogance met experience, technology met instinct, the future met the past, and the Huey waited silently, as if holding its breath, ready to reveal which side truly understood her heart. For a moment, Eli Vance was elsewhere. The heat, the laptops, the snickering technicians, all of it faded into the background. His eyes fixed on the Huey as if looking through time itself. Suddenly, the tarmac dissolved, replaced by a jungle canopy, thick with humidity, the roar of gunfire echoing like thunder. It was the A Shao Valley, 1968. He was 20 years younger, sweat and grime plastered to his face, knuckles raw from clutching the cyclic as tracer rounds zipped past him. The same helicopter, this very Huey, was caught in a firefight, the engine groaning under the stress of battle. A round had punched through the cowling, another had ripped through the tail boom. Inside, the co-pilot slumped unconscious, a dozen soldiers praying for survival. Eli had crawled out onto the skid in that chaos, every fiber of his being stretched to its limit. The wind tore at his uniform, the rotor wash like 1,000 hands trying to pull him away. From his leather pouch, he pulled the tools that would save the day. A roll of sealing tape, a stubby custom wrench, and his knowledge, honed by countless hours of improvisation and instinct, hands steady despite the madness, he patched, secured, and guided the machine back to life. Bullets shredded the air, engines screamed, and men yelled into radios that carried nothing but static. But the Huey lived. And so did they. He remembered every calculated risk, every second that could have ended it all. The memory didn't burn. It settled in his bones like an old scar, quiet, but indelible. Back on the tarmac, Eli's fingers hovered over the panels and access hatches, tracing the lines as if the jungle were still there, whispering instructions, only he could hear. The younger technicians, glued to their screens, could see nothing of this. They saw only old hands and outdated methods. But he knew the heartbeat of this helicopter, knew the way it moved and breathed under duress, knew the secrets hidden beneath panels no manual dared mention. The bird remembers, he muttered softly, almost to himself. His eyes flicked up, meeting Kramer's dismissive gaze and Wells's twitching jaw, but he said nothing more. The ghosts of Vietnam, wounded pilots, pinned down reconnaissance teams, endless missions in mud and rain, hovered behind him, lending weight to his quiet authority. The Huey, in its stubborn silence, was a living testament to all of it. It had carried him and countless others through impossible odds, survived when logic said it should have failed. And now, decades later, it waited for him to remember what had once kept it alive. To the crew, it was an old, temperamental machine. To Eli, it was a companion, a soldier, a reminder of courage, ingenuity, and sheer force of will. The gap between past and present, between instinct and data, yawned wide across the tarmac. The helicopter was a bridge, and Eli Vance was the only one who knew how to cross it. For the young technicians, the lesson had yet to begin. For Eli, the lesson had already started, quietly, patiently, like a shadow moving through the heat of the afternoon, recalling battles that would never be recorded in any modern logbook. Among the tangle of egos and equipment, a young airman named Peterson watched quietly. He wasn't laughing at the old man like the others, nor was he scowling at the ineptitude of the technicians. No, Peterson was paying attention. Something in Eli Vance's calm demeanor, the way his eyes scanned the helicopter, told him that the old man wasn't just another relic. He was someone who belonged here, someone the others had failed to recognize. Peterson knew rules. He had memorized protocols and chains of command. Breaking them could mean career suicide. But he also knew instinct, and his gut screamed that waiting for permission would cost more than pride. It might cost the demonstration, or worse, the integrity of the aircraft. So he acted. Slipping away from the crowded tarmac, he dug out his personal cell phone. It was a small rebellion against the rigid structure surrounding him. With deliberate care, he dialed the number of the general's direct aide, a major he had met just a month earlier during a briefing. His voice was low, urgent, and trembled slightly despite his effort to sound composed. "Major Davies? Sir, this is Airman Peterson at the flight line at Fort Holloway. I'm sorry to call directly, but it's about Mr. Vance." On the other end, the major's tone shifted instantly from routine to sharp concern. "What about him?" Peterson hesitated, then poured out the scene. The disrespect, the laughter, the dismissive attitude of the lead technician and the lieutenant. "They won't let him near the aircraft," he said. "They're relying on the computers. And sir, I don't think the computers know what's wrong, but Mr. Vance does. I can feel it." There was a pause. Static filled the line for a moment before muffled voices rose in the background. Peterson held his breath, fearing immediate reprimand. Then, the major's voice came back, sharper than before. "General, you need to hear this now." Miles. Away in the air-conditioned command center, General Michelelson picked up the phone himself. 3 stars gleamed on his collar, his face chiseled like granite. Peterson's words cut through the sterile calm of the control room. For a brief moment, the general's expression darkened, not with anger at the technical issue, but at the thought of an old hero being disrespected. "Get me Colonel Hayes on the line. Conference him with the tower at Holloway now," he ordered. "And get me a car. I'm going down there myself." Back on the tarmac, Eli remained undisturbed, still studying the Huey with the patience of someone who had waited decades for this moment. Kramer and Wells were oblivious, their focus swallowed by protocol and pride. But for Peterson, the young airman, everything had shifted. He realized that history, knowledge, and experience could not always be measured by rank or technical manuals. Sometimes, the right action was about trust. Trust in the quiet, unassuming expertise that had already earned its place in history. With trembling hands, he handed Eli the secure phone for the general, then stepped back, choosing to remain unseen. He watched silently as authority, tradition, and technology collided with intuition and decades of battle-hardened wisdom. And in that quiet, tense space, Peterson learned that courage wasn't only about bravery under fire. It was also about recognizing greatness when it stood right in front of you, even if everyone else dismissed it. The high-pitched squeal of tires cut through the stifling air like a gunshot. 3 black command vehicles skidded to a halt on the tarmac, doors flying open even before they fully stopped. The crowd of technicians froze mid-motion, mouths slightly agape, the collective tension thick enough to taste. From the lead vehicle emerged General Michelelson himself, every step deliberate, each movement precise. His presence was not merely commanding, it was magnetic with an authority honed over decades of service. Behind him, Colonel Hayes followed, pale and tight-lipped, knowing the storm that had just descended on his base. Lieutenant Wells instinctively reached for Eli, as if he could shield the old man from whatever wrath had just arrived. But the general ignored him, bypassing the stunned officer and the smirking lead technician entirely. Every eye on the tarmac followed him, yet he seemed to see only one thing. Eli Vance, standing calm, hands tucked into his worn jacket pockets, eyes fixed unwaveringly on the Huey. The general's heels cracked sharply against the concrete as he came to a halt. The sound echoed across the tarmac, marking a moment of suspended judgment. Then, with a precision born of years in service, he raised his hand in salute. Not a casual gesture, but the sharpest, most respectful salute of a long and storied career. "Mr. Vance," his voice boomed, carrying to every corner of the field. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir. I apologize for the reception you've received." Eli's response was simple, a nod, the faintest flicker of understanding in his pale blue eyes. He did not appear vindicated, nor angry. Only weary. Years of service, combat, and loss had taught him that recognition was fleeting. Respect earned in battle could not be demanded, it had to be acknowledged. The general's gaze swept over the gathered technicians, settling like a blade on Wells and Kramer. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper, yet somehow it carried across the tarmac with undeniable clarity. "Let me make something perfectly clear to all of you. This man, whom you have treated with profound disrespect, is a living legend of Army aviation, Elias the Ghost Vance. He holds the Distinguished Service Cross for valor, 2 silver stars, a bronze star with V device. He has more combat flight hours as a crew chief than every single pilot on this base combined." All eyes turned to the Patriot Bell. "This aircraft," the general continued, his voice steady and cutting, "is not merely a machine. It is a monument. In 1969, during a monsoon, Mr. Vance personally field-stripped and rebuilt her transmission in less than 12 hours to rescue a downed recon team. In 1970, he redesigned the fuel flow regulators on this very bird, a modification that is not in any manual, nor will it ever be. Shock rippled through the gathered crew. Kramer's face drained of color. Wells's knees went weak, his voice lost somewhere between disbelief and shame. The young technicians who had laughed moments ago now stood frozen, realizing the enormity of the man before them. The general's eyes narrowed, his attention piercing Wells directly. "Your arrogance, your blind faith in technology, and your lack of respect have disgraced your uniforms. And you," he gestured at Kramer, "mock the one man on this planet who knows this aircraft's every secret, offering help that you refuse to recognize. You threatened a legend, and yet he stands here, calm, offering wisdom instead of reprisal." Eli stepped forward, placing a steady, calming hand on the general's forearm. His voice was gentle, but it cut deeper than any reprimand. "They are good men, just from a different time. They trust their screens and signals. It's not their fault. The bird simply needs a familiar touch." The general's stare softened for a mere moment before he nodded curtly. "She's all yours, Ghost." The tarmac seemed to exhale collectively. The stage was set. History, patience, and skill had won. Now it was time for the Huey to speak, and for the lessons of the past to echo into the present. Eli Vance approached the Patriot Bell with the quiet confidence of a man who had flown, fought, and lived alongside her. No computers, no diagnostic tools, no fancy meters. Just a small worn leather pouch hanging from his jacket, a relic of his past missions, its leather soft from decades of use. He unclasped the snap with careful fingers and retrieved a single, oddly shaped wrench. Dark, curved at an angle that matched no standard tool, it felt like an extension of his own hand. The world seemed to shift. The sweltering sun of Fort Holloway faded, replaced by the humid, oily scent of a makeshift hangar in Kazan decades ago. Eli could see the mud, hear the rotor wash, smell the sweat and cordite, and feel the tremors of battle beneath his boots. He was 20 years old again, knuckles raw, hands working with precise confidence to keep a downed Huey in the air, saving lives from the chaos of gunfire and monsoon rains. Back on the tarmac, the present reclaimed him. He knelt by the access panel that Kramer had dismissed moments ago, his wrench sliding over the bolts with an ease no modern tool could match. 4 bolts came free, revealing a small lever nestled within a web of wires. It was a simple device, unremarkable to anyone else, but it held the secret to the aircraft's heartbeat. A manual bypass for the primary fuel injector, a modification Eli had designed for emergencies, something no computer could ever detect. With a practiced touch, he flipped the lever to the bypass position, replaced the panel, and tightened the bolts just so. The sound of metal settling was soft, yet it resonated across the gathered crew like a drumbeat announcing triumph. Then, almost ceremoniously, he walked to the cockpit door. Calm, patient, confident. "Someone want to try her now?" he asked, voice steady, almost trance-like. Kramer, hesitant, climbed into the pilot's seat. His hands shook as he went through the startup sequence, muscle memory battling nervous anticipation. He flipped switches and toggles, ignored the tremor in his own confidence, and pressed the ignition. The result was immediate. A cough, a sputter. And then the turbine roared to life with a voice that shook the air, a familiar, powerful whump, whump, whump that had defined generations. The rotor blades, drooping under the afternoon sun, sprang to attention, spinning faster and faster, cutting the heat and tension into blades of vibration and sound. The response from the crew was electric. Airman Peterson let out a whoop, tears welling in his eyes. Technicians who had mocked moments before clapped and cheered, faces alight with awe and newfound respect. The once arrogant Kramer sat stunned, unable to reconcile the roar of life, under his hands with the defiance of the old man standing silently beside him. Eli Vance watched with a quiet, sad smile. This was not triumph over others, nor a vindication of his skill. It was the return of a friend, a machine he had loved and understood, alive once more. Around him the tarmac seemed lighter, the sun warmer, the chaos of the day finally settling into a calm rhythm. He had brought her back. Not with technology alone, not with arrogance or protocol, but with understanding, patience, and the kind of experience that no algorithm could replicate. And in that moment, the generation standing on the sun-baked concrete learned what it meant to respect history, honor wisdom, and trust hands that had saved lives long before screens had any say in the matter. The roar of the Patriot bells engine faded into a steady, confident hum as the helicopter hovered, alive and obedient beneath the hot afternoon sun. The technicians stood frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of awe, shame, and newfound humility. For once, the rules and manuals that had once seemed infallible felt inadequate in the face of lived experience, of decades of knowledge, etched into muscle memory and instinct. Peterson, still wide-eyed, glanced at Eli. The old man's calm demeanor, the quiet authority that had guided his hands and decisions, radiated a lesson far greater than any lecture or technical brief could provide. He realized then that courage and wisdom often arrive silently, without fanfare, but leave a permanent mark. Lieutenant Wells and Kyle Kramer, humbled to their cores, approached Eli at the edge of the rotor wash. Their voices, tentative at first, carried the weight of genuine remorse. "Mr. Vance," Wells began, his words almost a whisper, We were wrong. Our arrogance, our lack of respect. It's inexcusable. I am sorry." Kramer's voice, thick with emotion he could barely contain, followed. "Sir, I don't even know where to start. We misjudged you. We treated you like a relic. It was shameful." Eli studied them both for a long moment, eyes sharp yet kind, taking measure of the sincerity that had replaced their pride. Then, with the simplest gesture, he extended an invitation not of reprimand, but of inclusion. "Sit," he said, nodding, to a nearby bench, voice gentle yet firm. "Let's have a cup of coffee. There are stories to tell, lessons to remember." It was not just an offer of reconciliation. It was a bridge, built across the decades separating youth and experience, arrogance and humility, protocol and wisdom. In that quiet moment, Fort Holloway was no longer just a base. It was a classroom, and Eli Vance, without fanfare or hubris, was its teacher. In the days that followed, General Michael Elson quietly instituted changes across the command. the Heritage Program became mandatory for all maintenance personnel, blending technical expertise with historical understanding and highlighting the lives of those who had built, flown, and preserved the machines that defined their legacy. The first module was dedicated to the UH-1 Huey, and its star was none other than a young crew chief named Elias Vance. Grainy photographs, dog-eared manuals, and stories of battlefield ingenuity became lessons in respect, patience, and the value of experience. Weeks later, Wells and Kramer found Eli at a small roadside diner just outside the base. He sat alone in a sunlit booth, nursing a cup of coffee, the quiet weight of a life well lived reflected in his gaze. They approached hesitantly, hats in hand, hearts heavy with the memory of their folly. "Mr. Vance," Wells said softly, voice trembling, "we came to apologize. For everything. There's no excuse. We were arrogant and we were wrong." Eli looked up, pale blue eyes meeting theirs, and for the first time, a faint smile crossed his face. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the empty booth. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee, and if you have the time, I'll tell you a story or two about that old bird." As they sat together, sunlight streaming through the diner windows, Eli's stories began to weave the past into the present. The roar of rotors, the rush of adrenaline, the quiet ingenuity of survival, all became lessons, bridging generations. The young men, once so full of certainty, learned that true mastery was more than knowledge. It was respect, patience, courage, and the willingness to listen to those who had lived what they had only read about. History, Eli Vance reminded them, was not a relic. It was alive, waiting for those willing to understand it. And the Patriot bell, humming softly in its hangar, was proof that the past could still teach, guide, and inspire the future. Eli Vance's story is more than the tale of one man and one helicopter. It is a testament to the quiet heroism that often goes unseen, to the patience and wisdom that can outlast technology, pride, and even time itself. The Patriot bell, stubborn and faithful, became a symbol, not just of military might, but of respect for those who understand the heartbeat of a machine, the lives it carries, and the history it represents. The lesson echoes beyond Fort Holloway and the mechanics of a Huey. It is about humility in the face of experience, courage to recognize greatness in unexpected places, and the power of bridging generations. Eli's gentle guidance turned arrogance into awe, laughter into respect, and skepticism into understanding. In doing so, he reminded everyone present, and us watching, that true mastery cannot be measured by manuals or screens alone. It lives in the hands and hearts of those who have endured, learned, and persevered. Perhaps most importantly, it is a story about connection. Between generations, between past and present, between human and machine. Peterson, Wells, Kramer, and even the other technicians, all were transformed not through orders or lectures, but by witnessing someone who embodied the wisdom of experience, who showed them that patience and understanding could accomplish what force and technology could not. Stories like Eli Vance's deserve to be remembered. They remind us to honor those who came before, to listen more than we speak, and to value knowledge that cannot be found in any manual or screen. The ghost of the past still walks among us, guiding hands, shaping decisions, and keeping the legacy alive, if we are willing to pay attention. If Eli's story moved you, remember to share it, leave a like, and subscribe for more tales that honor courage, ingenuity, and the quiet heroes who have shaped history. These lessons transcend time, teaching us that respect, wisdom, and patience will always have a place in our world.